Okay, so there's a couple of concepts.
You are not sharing yet. There you go.
Okay. All right, so we want this one. All right, so we have two things. One, just from the principal level, we have what is essentially, you know, a body of investigative work. And that is this black box. And it takes place it's documented in the system in separate locations. So they're linked, but they're separate. So you have the CSE, which is the core body for documentation of the investigative activities. And then you can have these administrative actions that they themselves can have sort of child records. So this is sort of the relationship. So it's sort of parent or grandparent, child, or child, grandchild, kind of. But you have like multiple levels, and this can go, you know, a couple different levels. But what the PICs want is they don't want to have to like read part of this story of the investigative work here and then go here to read this part and then go here to read this part. They want to have one place to go where they can read sort of like the full narrative. And that is in like they write their narrative, sort of their summary of activities in these notes. And so what we want to do is have these notes roll up to the parent, and then if there's like another level. So they all sort of, they type them in here. You can view them in the context of this record, but then you can also see them in the notes of the parent record, and then also in the notes of the grandparent record.
Yeah.
Or it's like even if this was like 5 layers deep, it would still all roll up. So you would also always see the descendant notes in the sort of higher order records, higher level records. Does that make sense?
Correct. Now,
okay.
When we bring it to the CSE level, do we need to reference where are they coming from, right?
Yes, okay. Yes. So I'll get to that in a second.
All right.
There's another concept that I'm kind of trying to work out, and that is this concept of dispositions. This yesterday. Also will roll up, and possibly what I'm thinking is that would also roll up and be displayed in the notes. So a disposition is basically, you know, that they have a number of things that they do asynchronously. So they're not directly part of a workflow. And they need to be able to say, hey, I did this.
This was done, yeah.
It was done on this date. So the actual date, not the date that they enter in the disposition, but the actual date. And then some note about it. So they can, you know, have that as part of the narrative. So one concept I have is that there's kind of like 2 ways to get it in. And I don't know if that's going to be just like too much, or if it's going to be something that they like. So we'll see. We'll kind of introduce some concepts both ways in the next couple of weeks. But essentially those will roll up in the notes too. So the way I've diagrammed this is you have a note. So imagine this is the notes page in the CSE. You can have this type of object in that feed, that list of notes, which is just the note that was entered directly into that record. So nothing special. Then you can have a note from that record that is sort of in the shape of a disposition. So you can have kind of a disposition. And I don't know if you're familiar with Slack.
Yeah.
Okay, so Slack has,
Mm-hmm.
let me get to an example here. Slack has this kind of note element, like a post element. And
Yeah.
this is kind of what I'm thinking is a good pattern. So you have like the message, and then you have this sort of container within it that has this different type of object. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Yeah, I'm very familiar with
Yeah.
Slack, so that sounds
Okay.
good.
So that's kind of the model that I'm thinking that for dispositions. And then you can show that disposition within the context of a note, and you can use it elsewhere in the record if we wanted to have a disposition history somewhere, for example.
If
You
I
can see it.
compare this to an iframe, it's gonna be similar, right? Like I have the original.
It would not be an iframe, but it would be similar to that in that it's a nested
Exactly.
content. But think of it more as, it's more like, object-oriented UX, where you have,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with that, where you have kind of these different object types, and you can it's just the data, right? And then you can display it differently depending on the context.
Okay.
So you can show more or less, or show it in a little bit different treatment, but the data that feeds it, is like one source, but then it can display in a couple of different ways. So
like
that's
that.
dispositions. But then you have also notes from a child record. So that could be all the descendants. So anything that bubbles up. And then also disposition from the child record, because they want the disposition to roll up as well. Because they want to be able to enter in a disposition, like when they're working on this post-pay review, they want to have a disposition that comes up. And they can see it in the case, so that from the case you can see, okay, this is the disposition in this, this is a disposition, and this is where it kind of like what it has to do with. So it's this child record.
Perfect.
And then for dispositions, I'm also envisioning maybe this disposition component on the overview page for this CSE, for instance. And that could have I'm also envisioning like two types of dispositions. One is system disposition entry. So if some user takes some action or some workflow event happens that we identify as, hey, this means a new disposition for this record, then we can have the system sort of auto-populate that. And we can prompt the user for these other things if we need to, like actual date and any kind of notation, when they press that button, basically. And then that will update the disposition. But other things, we don't have a workflow thing for them, so they would do those manually. And then, so that's how they kind of get in there. And then you can also have disposition from the child record in there.
Can we have a sample of the dispositions? Have you seen them?
Yeah, I mean, we will ask that of the picks to get those, but it's basically like beneficiary interview conducted, or medical review complete, or payment suspension requested, payment suspension approved. What's that?
It's like a higher rank of a note, like more directly to a case.
So it's basically we want to differentiate it from a note because it makes the information reportable. Okay. Because you can say, show me the disposition history for this case, and where to look for the data, because it's a disposition table. There's the disposition value, the actual date, the notation. If there's other data that we need to capture, that too. But then you can do reporting on saying, like, how many Benny interviews did we conduct? And then you can do a search across all of the records for a certain period of time for dispositions where the value equals beneficiary interview. And you can do a count. That's a simple example of where that kind of comes back around. But then this, you can also filter this notes to just show dispositions, for instance.
Yeah.
So that's where we might not need like a disposition component. If they can just go to the notes and filter to show dispositions and see that, we might, that might be easier for them. But we'll see.
This is I like this idea. It's very nice.
So that's kind of the concept. And then I started doing some examples, and this is just sort of more just trying to get it out of my head. Not really trying to solve it, but getting a rough example just to share the idea. So this would be, like I was thinking for a note that comes from a child record, let's say, you have the person who posted it, the source. So we have this kind of banner that shows the record type. It's a post-pay review note, and it's from this record. We might do something more like this, where we number it here, because we're numbering these notes. But for the, I don't want to solve this right now, but it's a thing we need to sort out, because if you've got mixed content, you want like a numbering system for these notes that come directly from this record, but you may not want to have, that's not going to align with things that come from another record. So this may be like note,
like
4 in that post-pay review,
good,
for example, or whatever, right? And it's not note 14 overall, it's just note 4. Or maybe it comes in as note 14 here, but it's note 4 or note 3 from the post-pay review. So it may be like both. And then the disposition, so disposition here, beneficiary, interview, actual date, and a note. So this is very simple. I don't know if these are the data points that we'll collect, but having some kind of different display for that, similar to that, like post idea from Slack. And then this is just a regular note that's part of this record.
So we basically separate the notes by the date.
What's that?
You are separating the block, let's put it that way, with the date. Okay.
Yep. So you have a date separated. This part is already done. They've already developed this part. This would be the new part of this. So
Joel, I have a naive question. If Kevin Williams is the one working on this disposition, shouldn't this be enclosed with the disposition area, within the disposition area, to make it more clear for the user?
Well, they want to make this disposition part of the overall summary of, overall narrative. So that's why we may want both, we may want it here as well as here.
Okay.
So there's a lot going on this page, this overview page. I don't know why that's there. But this was something that I was playing around with the other day too, is where do we show this disposition in a way that provides a sort of at a glance. You can see the disposition history, and then you can see and add a new disposition manually from here. So this would be like the landing page for the record. You can just come in here, boom, add a new disposition. It will add it automatically to the notes, so you don't have to do that twice. But the other thing I was thinking was you could also come here and add a disposition
in here,
and then it would pop up the same dialogue that you would get if you click this, right? So we just kind of have a single component for that disposition, adding a disposition or editing a disposition.
Good.
So
I like that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the concept that I'm trying to work through.
Okay, I'm gonna work on this as well.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to pick that up for it.
Totally. No problem. No problem at all. I recorded this, so that's fine.
Sure.
On the side note,